Hello and welcome to the lecture recording for our final part of Module 2, which focuses on ecosystem ecology. As I've stated in the previous recordings for population and community ecology, we're going in a slightly different order here than your textbook, but really these could be viewed in either direction, certainly either sort of moving from the smaller level of ecological organization toward the top or going in the reverse direction. But we started at the bottom and we're kind of moving to the top here. So in this lecture, back up from that. We are going to break this up into two separate recordings. In this first recording, we're going to cover these first two topics of ecosystem ecology, energy and matter, as well as trophic efficiency. We talked a bit about food webs and trophic relationships in the community ecology lecture, but I'm going to kind of add another layer to that discussion. In a separate and second recording, we will talk a bit about nutrient cycles and how matter moves through ecosystems, and I'll introduce the concept of biomes. As has been the case with all of the concepts we've introduced in this ecology unit, these are really important fundamental concepts that we'll be coming back to and sort of invoking and referencing as we get into the part of the course where we're considering kind of the nature and scale of environmental issues and discussing proposed solutions to environmental issues. Okay, so we've seen this figure from your textbook a few times already, and we've spoken in detail about the community and population levels of ecology, and we're sort of scaling up to a kind of broader scale of consideration here. So an ecosystem kind of builds on what we already know about communities, but layers in the physical environment. So when referencing an ecosystem, we're including all of the organisms in a given area, so the full biotic living component, but we're also considering the non-living factors, the non-living components, or abiotic components of an environment. So this would be the physical environment in which living organisms interact. So this considers things like rain and sunlight and wind, access to nutrients, pH of the soil, any physical characteristic you can think of that could influence, the survival or success of a particular organism. Now, the scale doesn't end here. We're going to, in terms of sort of our formal treatment of ecological topics, but we can certainly consider ecological interactions at the level of the biosphere, which is the sum of all of the Earth's ecosystems. And more we understand the connectivity between different ecosystems. So this is an important level. And in part 2 of this lecture, we will be talking about biomes, which constitutes these distinctive types of ecosystems that are determined or classified by climate and by the dominant organisms that are adapted to those biomes. So that's a sort of convenient application of ecosystem concepts that we will introduce. Okay, so I spoke ahead a little bit in terms of kind of defining ecosystems. But once again, we're considering at the ecosystem level, all of the organisms living in a community, in addition to the physical environment, right? The abiotic factors that they depend on or interact with. Something to keep in mind, especially when we're considering ecology in this way of sort of increasing scale, ecosystems are not necessarily defined by a larger size, right? So an ecosystem can be a range of shapes, a range of sizes. One single simple tide pool qualifies as an ecosystem. An entire desert, like the Mojave Desert, qualifies as an ecosystem. Okay, so ecosystems can be tiny little microcosms, like a tide pool, like the space under a fallen log. an aquarium, for example, is its own ecosystem. So the size can range dramatically. Regardless of the size of an ecosystem, the dynamics at the level of an ecosystem tend to revolve around two primary processes. So there's two fundamental processes that link species with each other and with their environment. And those two processes are energy flow and matter cycle. So how chemicals or matter cycle through an ecosystem. So energy flow, we're going to elaborate on both of these concepts, but energy flow refers to the one-way passage of energy through an ecosystem. So energy enters into an ecosystem through the sun, or from the sun ultimately. Some of that energy is harnessed, but a lot of it is lost to the ecosystem in the form of heat or light. So new energy arrives every day in the form of sunlight. And again, some of it's captured, but much of it flows through. It's essentially a one-way trip, all right? Chemicals or matter, on the other hand, cycle through a system. So they're not in a one-directional flow. So the movement of life's essential nutrients, life's essential chemicals are constantly being recycled through an ecosystem, okay? And so that's what we mean by, chemicals or matter cycle and energy flows. And it's a very important concept. To fully understand these dynamics, I want to elaborate a bit on the nature of energy and the nature of matter. As I said, in the second part of this lecture, we'll be talking about nutrient cycles. So we'll get into more detail with that at that point. But here's just a visual that summarizes that same concept, that again, energy flows, it's a one-way trip, and matter is cycled. So it changes form, but it's not gained or lost. So once again, energy enters our ecosystems through solar radiation, and some of that is captured for energy, but a lot of that is lost in the form of light or in the form of heat, so radiation from the Earth's surface. Matter, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, stays in the biosphere. It cycles through organisms, it cycles in and out of organisms, and it moves through physical components and environmental components. So it changes form, often from inorganic to organic forms or pools. But again, it stays within the system, all right? Now, again, as I've said a few times, these are all concepts we're going to come back to. We're going to think about pollution and waste management and the accumulation of certain types of materials in our Earth's systems. So something to start thinking about is, based on this principle, why is it so important that species recycle matter and that they depend on a source of energy that is readily available, that is renewable, like solar radiation, okay? Okay, so all of this, again, I want to give a little bit more background here, and make sure everyone's on the same page and feels comfortable understanding these concepts. And the first thing to elaborate on here is the definition of energy, this concept of energy. So energy is defined as the capacity to do work, okay, the ability to do work. So, the capacity, for example, to like move an object of a given mass by applying force, all right? Energy exists in a lot of different forms. So we can think of, electrical energy, we can think of chemical energy, thermal energy, nuclear energy. And again, energy can be transformed, right, or converted from one of these forms to the other. And once again, I'm elaborating on this here because we're going to think a lot about this in terms of energy sources and the difference between fossil fuels and other alternatives. to fossil fuels. So this is the topic we're going to get into in quite a bit more detail later in the semester. We tend to classify energy in one of two categories, or I should say, as potential or kinetic energy. All right. So potential energy is a form of stored energy. Energy in motion is what we describe as kinetic energy. Okay. So a battery is a form of potential as a form of potential energy. Once that battery is plugged in and put to work, and that energy is converted to get a job done, that transforms into kinetic energy. All right. This, simple diagram here is illustrating this. You have a person holding a ball up on a step. That's a form of potential energy. Once they drop the ball, that is energy in motion, right? That's that potential energy being transformed into kinetic energy. And again, this has a lot of applications. We're going to talk about this in terms of the energy of cells, right? So for example, the energy that's in the bonds of a sugar molecule is a form of potential energy. It's through the reactions of our cells that we release that potential energy. Okay, but this also has consequences for how we think of energy on a larger scale. For example, building dams, right? That creates potential energy by holding water in place. And when that dam is released, that transforms the potential energy into kinetic energy, and it's used to do work. Okay. The ability to utilize energy is a characteristic of all living things, every living thing, whether we're talking about a very complex multicellular organism like ourselves or, a single-celled bacterium. Every living organism needs to utilize energy. And we need energy to move, to grow, to defend ourselves against disease, for reproduction, to repair injuries, for every process that maintains life, essentially, we require energy. Now, I want to introduce briefly throughout this lecture, two principles of thermodynamics that are really important in understanding what we're going to be discussing about the nature of energy in ecosystems. The first law of thermodynamics, so this is a law of physics and chemistry, but we're applying it here to ecosystems, in particular, this issue of energy flow. So the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So energy enters an ecosystem as solar radiation, as I mentioned before, and some of that is harnessed, but a lot of that is lost in the form of heat and radiation. So photosynthesis is the chemical process that, again, takes light energy and converts it into chemical energy, which is a form of potential energy. All right. And that's the energy that our cells then are able to kind of harness to get work done. All right. But in this process, as we're going to see, much of that incoming light energy is lost in the form of heat during the process of photosynthesis. Okay. So a kind of simple way to say this in terms of how we're going to apply this to ecosystems is that the total energy in a system remains constant, right? Although it can be converted from one form to another, like light energy to chemical energy, all right? So that is what we're referring to back here when we say that light can enter and leave. So that's what this diagram is referring to with respect to energy. So as in terms of Earth as a system, light can enter the system, energy can enter the system in the form of light and leave the system in the form of heat. But again, the total amount of energy in a system remains constant, okay? Now, the second law of thermodynamics is also important to consider alongside the first law. The second law of thermodynamics is a physical law that references specifically kind of heat and those energy conversions. Okay, so it kind of builds on the first law of thermodynamics, and sort of one like simple way of characterizing the second law of thermodynamics is to say that heat always moves downhill, essentially. So heat is always moving from hotter objects to colder objects, so downhill, unless energy is invested to reverse the direction of heat flow, all right? Another way to think about this is in terms of entropy. So that word entropy refers to randomness. So entropy is a state of disorder or randomness. Okay, or really kind of uncertainty. So based on what we know about these heat exchanges and the tendency of heat to once again move quote unquote downhill, we can predict then that every energy exchange is going to increase entropy, which means it's going to increase disorder. It's going to increase randomness in the universe, okay? So this law of thermodynamics is basically establishing this concept of entropy as like a physical property of a system, okay? And it refers to the breakdown of these energy transfers. So you might be wondering why I have a photo of an old man here. You know, aging is an example of an increasing state of disorderness, increasing entropy, right? And from the day we're born, right, our systems are essentially slowly breaking down, but we invest energy to fight that breakdown, to prevent that kind of descending into a state of disorder or randomness, okay? So the simplified version of all of this is that energy exchanges are very inefficient. So again, the amount of energy in our universe and our ecosystem stays constant, and energy is lost with all of those conversions between forms of energy. Now, there's a lot of exceptions to this, and again, I'm trying to simplify like fairly complex topics here. But as it applies to ecosystems and energy transformations, like generally speaking, you have about a 1% efficiency for autotrophs, which are the producers doing photosynthesis, meaning only about 1% of the sun's energy is actually incorporated into biomass. For heterotrophs and for consumers, it's around a 10% efficiency, and I'm going to elaborate on that in more detail. So the key take-home point here is that in an ecosystem, energy conversions are not completely efficient, and there's always some energy lost in the form of heat. And I'm going to reference back to these cellular processes that you can see here, but this is just showing a simple diagram of both photosynthesis occurring within a plant cell, and also cellular respiration occurring within mitochondria. And photosynthesis, of course, is the process that makes sugar. Cellular respiration is the process that breaks down that sugar to generate energy, to generate ATP that the cell uses as a form of energy. And again, both processes involve the loss of energy in the form of heat. Okay, so the take-home point of all of that, excuse me, just get rid of my writing there so you can read that. The take-home point of all of that is that these are fundamental laws of physics and of chemistry, all right? And we cannot break those laws. So from an ecosystem management perspective, there are limits. And our use of energy is inherently not very efficient. Okay, let's elaborate on this briefly. So we want to think about this now in terms of energy exchanges, which is going to involve feeding relationships. So from an energetic perspective, we can classify organisms as either autotrophs or heterotrophs. I started to briefly define this in the previous slide. Autotrophs are organisms like plants. We often also refer to these as producers who are able to make their own food, all right? So there are photosynthetic bacteria, things like algae, kelp, other types of protists, and plants can capture sunlight and take in carbon dioxide, which is an inorganic form of carbon, through a series of pretty complex reactions, create sugar, all right? And then they break down that sugar for energy or as an energy source. Heterotrophs, we talked both about consumers and decomposers in the community ecology lecture, cannot make their own food. So they require an organic carbon source from their environment. And they get that by either eating other organisms, like in the case of consumers, or breaking down, waste products of other organisms, as is the case of decomposers. And we already understand from the previous lecture, kind of the relationship between autotrophs and heterotrophs in a food chain. So the sun, as we've established, is the source of almost all the energy on the planet, almost. And again, it's the job of autotrophs like phytoplankton, green plants, algae, to convert this into a form of chemical energy. And the reaction that does that is photosynthesis, all right? So plants and other producers take light energy, take in carbon dioxide, and also use water as an electron donor through a series of chemical reactions, through the light reactions, through the carbon fixation reactions, ultimately to produce a molecule of sugar. And then they release oxygen as a byproduct of those reactions, all right? Producers aren't done there. That sugar, that molecule is a form of potential energy, all right? It's chemical energy. So this process has converted light energy to chemical energy, but to release that potential energy, we have to break the bonds that are holding that sugar molecule together, all right? And that's what the process of cellular respiration does. So cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria of cells, and it takes that sugar, it uses the oxygen that's a waste product of photosynthesis to essentially break apart that sugar molecule. And in breaking apart that sugar molecule, the process releases the energy, that potential energy that's stored in the bonds that hold those atoms together. That process releases water and releases carbon dioxide, which are then utilized by photosynthesis, okay? So these are the processes that are involved in the conversion of forms of energy, but it's a cycle, right? They're connected to each other through their products and reactants. So I spoke ahead about the cellular respiration part of this so that you could see the connection. But again, consumers are converting the energy in that sugar molecule back to a usable form of energy. This is a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that our cells use to get work done. The amount of energy stored in a food item, as you know, is expressed in calories. That's a way of quantifying the available energy. And that's defined, a calorie is defined as the amount of energy required to raise a liter of water by 1 degree Celsius. Okay, now let's bring this back to the ecological topics that we've been talking about here. So in the community ecology lecture, we introduced food webs, trophic linkages, and feeding relationships. We looked at both food chains, like the one that you see here, and the more complex food webs that communicate sort of all of the feeding relationships. So hopefully you've watched that already and feel comfortable with that topic. But these diagrams show how energy is moving through a community and through an ecosystem, right? And we defined these trophic levels as primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, so on and so forth. So this you already know. What I want to add on to this now is a layer of detail regarding the energy transfers. Now that we understand the principles behind why these transfers are inefficient. So we can take a food pyramid or a food chain and add on to that this trophic efficiency. All right, so trophic efficiency, remember, trophic just means feeding, right? So trophic efficiency is the percentage of production transferred from one level to another. This is often referred to as the 10% rule, because generally the amount of energy that is transferred between levels is about 10%. That is a very general rule, and it really depends on the type of organisms we're talking about. Generally speaking, birds and mammals are even less efficient because we are endothermic. We use metabolism to maintain our body heat, and that's more energetically demanding. Insects, microorganisms, some invertebrates have much higher efficiencies. Fish, around 10%. And if we kind of average it all out, it's around 10%, but there is a range. So just, again, accept this as a general rule. So what the 10% rule is accounting for in this energy pyramid now is the loss of energy in the form of heat with that comes with all of the transfers between trophic linkages, or excuse me, between trophic levels. Now, what this diagram is not showing is this how many calories, the equivalent of kilocalories, were required for there to be 10,000 kilocalories of plant material. Because remember, the efficiency, the amount of sunlight that plants are actually capturing and transforming into biomass is around 1%. But we're going to start with the, again, quote unquote, bottom of the food chain. So of the sunlight that a plant absorbs, about 90% of that goes into, biomass and creating, growth and reproduction. All right. When it gets eaten by a consumer, only 10% of its energy, that's again, bulk of energy sort of locked into that level, only about 10% of it will go to the animal that eats it. All right. Of that primary consumer is going to, again, use as much of that energy as it can in growth, in breathing, in reproduction, in moving, and all of those points that we mentioned above. But much of that is lost in the form of waste. Some of it is lost in the form of heat during respiration. So it's only about, of those 10,000 calories, about 1,000 calories that actually gets incorporated into biomass. Organisms that are lower on the food chain like this produce a lot of waste. If you've ever, I've reared caterpillars before, and caterpillars are, herbivores they're eating lots and lots of plant biomass, and they produce so much waste constantly, okay? Again, that waste is not lost to the ecosystem. It's then broken down by decomposers and recycled, but the energy is changed to heat during the process. So the energy is lost, all right? And so then you go up from there. Of those 1,000 kilocalories in the primary consumer level, 10% make it to the next level in the food chain. So that's 100 kilocalories, so on and so forth. So this 10% rule explains, again, or I should say encapsulates the principles of thermodynamics that we've talked about so far. But it also explains why energy limits the number of trophic levels an ecosystem can support. And I kind of hinted at this idea in the community ecology lecture, but I wanted to hold off until we understood the dynamics of energy a bit more clearly, okay? This is why it takes so much land and so much space to support a top predator, okay? So the other way to look at this and to think about it is to look at it from the top down, right? So to support this red-tailed hawk, you need at least, this equivalent amount of energy in plants, plant biomass, to support the amount of animal biomass that hawk ultimately consumes, okay? Okay, so that 10% rule, as I've just walked through, is kind of multiplied over the length of the food chain. Here's just another simplified example of that, showing this transfer of energy, using kind of a similar example to the one before, but also accounting for that at this step, it's only a 1% capture by plants. And then again, 10% of the energy inherent in that plant biomass makes it to the next level, and then 10% of that makes it to the in this case, secondary consumer. So it's an important layer to add to our understanding of food pyramids and biomass pyramids. And this is what we would refer to as an energy pyramid, where again, the width of each step represents the rate of energy flow through each trophic level, right? And the steps get smaller because, again, some of that energy is changed to a form that can't be consumed by organisms at the next higher step. So we can indicate this by energy, and we can also indicate this by biomass. This is a point I was starting to build to a moment ago. So biomass sums up the total mass of a group of organisms, right? And it generally, like those energy transfers, decreases from the bottom to the top, all right? And it's decreasing because of those inefficiencies in the transfer of energy. So you need a lot of biomass of grass to support this amount of over 21,000 kilograms per kilometer squared of rabbits. And that's how many rabbits are needed to support, 2,100 kilogram per kilometer squared worth of foxes, to support a certain number of wolves in a given ecosystem, all right? Now, there are exceptions to all of this. Like we're painting pretty broad brushstrokes here. There are examples of ecosystems where you can have, a single oak tree that is supporting a tremendous amount of biomass in an ecosystem. So one oak tree can host over a couple thousand insects that are enough to feed 90 sparrows, that are enough to support a hawk in that ecosystem. Okay, so not all ecosystems are created the same, but this general shape of both biomass and energy pyramids captures the important essence of the nature of the inefficiency of energy transfers. Okay, so the key here is the flow of energy. And again, this particular diagram from your book referring to Earth being a closed system for matter, but not for energy, is referring to this idea that energy enters in the form of solar radiation and it can leave the system in the form of radiation and heat. So that energy flow is this one-way passage through an ecosystem, and it's inherently inefficient. Matter, in contrast, as I've said quite a few times now, cycles through an ecosystem. So matter's transformed, but it's contained and remains within an ecosystem. Okay, so that is where I'm going to end this lecture. And in part 2, to wrap up ecosystem ecology, we're now going to talk more specifically about how matter and nutrients cycle through an ecosystem and how that dynamic contrasts with what we just discussed about energy flow. So I'll pause here just in the interest of keeping these lectures in shorter chunks, but make sure you click on over to that when you're ready, and that will be the final recording for Module 2.